5 minutes past 11.
Call 020 722 42000.
Text 81333. Start your message with the word London.
BBC London 94.9.
Simon Lederman Show, BBC London 94.9. I've had that moment that I've had once before in my life. I've just said to our next guest who's going to be here this hour to review the day and take your calls, Jonathan Davis, who's an economist and wealth manager, who we last heard from on the night of the election, I think before we knew the result, but we certainly had the exit poll by the time we spoke to you, Jonathan. And I said, do you mind if I ask people if they want to ring up, if they've got a question about the economy, about house prices, about mortgage rates, about employment, about the stock market, etc.? And you said, well, you already have, which of course is true, but I'm glad that you're taking it with such good grace. What kind of areas are you happy taking the odd generic call on?
Could be the outlook for the economy, inflation, interest rates, house prices, stock market. There we go.
Here we go. We won't take a specific call about your specific to minutiae, because I think we can't give that kind of advice. We certainly can't give about where you should invest or whether you should sell your house and for how much. But we can certainly talk about the generics of the economy in the area that you're interested in. So it's really worthwhile you doing so. 0207 224 2000 is our number. And one thing that I found really interesting that you said on the election, and you said again when you came in this evening, that really to the stock market, they wouldn't have particularly been concerned whether the Conservative got in again with Lib Dems or alone, or the Labour Party with another coalition.
Yeah, I think the city is truly less interested in who's in number 10 Downing Street and more what's happening globally. You go back to, say, 2000 when you had the dot-com bust. We don't have many particular huge dot-com companies at that time, and yet our stock market collapsed, as did America's, and etc. Similarly, in 2008, you had the subprime mortgage collapse in America. We didn't have a thing called subprime mortgages. We had similar, but the fact is we were part of the global crash. The United Kingdom, I'm delighted to say, is one of the most open economies in the world, and indeed I hope that we stay open, that we don't go protectionist like the 1930s. And when the global economy is doing well, we will do well, and indeed the government can add to that with various interventions. But when the global economy is not doing well, we're going to be affected by that. We'll see what happens in due course.
We'll take calls this hour on all the matters we've been debating so far. Prince Charles's letters, also about extremism, and the words from David Cameron saying that we're too tolerant. But you could argue, as we were saying earlier on, in fact, Chris made the point that in a sense tolerance is to be applauded. We were asking whether actually tolerance is Britain's strength, and it's an interesting call we had just before the headlines. And we're also asking if you've been to the doctor, been given a drug or tests that you thought actually you didn't need. And there is a concern from the Academy of Medical Royal Colleges saying that patients should be encouraged to ask their medical procedures, ask if the procedures you were given were really necessary. They want to try and stop overdiagnosis and needless treatments of swathes of the population. We're asking if you've been through that and you think actually you have asked your doctor questions about the treatment you've been offered. And as I say, Jonathan Davis, take your calls this hour as well. Dave is in Islington. Evening to you, Dave.
Good evening, Simon. Sorry,
Welcome.
I didn't get your guest name.
Jonathan Davis.
Jonathan Dave. Hey, good evening, Jonathan.
Good evening.
Good evening. I'd like to talk about Patricia May.
Theresa May, yeah.
Theresa May. I think she's right. We shouldn't let anybody else into the country. We shouldn't take any of the refugees.
Why not?
We've got people, if you go to any city in England and there's people on the streets. I mean, I travel all over England doing my job, and every city I go to, there's people in cardboard boxes everywhere, and we can't even help them people, so how can we help others?
Well, there's two things interesting there, actually. The one thing is, can we not help the people in cardboard boxes? Because you could argue that we are one of the wealthiest countries in the world.
Well, we don't seem to be.
Well, that's one thing, and we'll see if our guest agrees that we're one of the wealthiest countries in the world. And the second thing is, in a sense, there's two aspects of this. One, there's an awful lot of people in this country whose families can be traced back to other occasions in life where there's been hideous scenes in other countries around the world, and they have come here as an escape and to found a new home for them and their family. We've done it before. We've done it throughout generations. We've done it in exceptionally difficult times. We did it after the Second World War when we were still on rations, and we survived. And actually, that's been, in a sense, the strength of the country.
Yeah, but we've only got a pint pot. You can't get 2 pints in it. We're full up. We can't look after our own people. You had somebody on the other day that was stealing food.
Last night, yeah.
Last night, yeah. They were stealing food. We can't even help them people.
But in a sense, the question is whether we could do all of those things, and it's been down to governments of every colour who have failed to help the people here. Because, I mean, is it unfair, Jonathan, to say we are one of the wealthiest countries in the world?
It's not at all unfair to say that. The fact is, we're in the first world, we're in the West. We have an enormous banking industry. It is definitely fair. We are one of the wealthiest countries in the world.
And is it also right for Dave to be... Sorry, Dave, you're also still here. I can hear you. I'm just going to say, is it also right for Dave to be saying we are the wealthiest, but we can't even help the people who are sleeping in cardboard boxes? Could we help those people?
We definitely could. There's no question about that.
So why isn't somebody helping them?
Well, you know, I think at 11:10 at night, I couldn't go into the minutiae there. You'd have to get an expert in, but I'll tell you this. The government in 2008, 2009, not the Conservatives or the Liberal Democrats, handed the banks hundreds of billions of pounds. Now, as I say...
And the banks have kept it.
They certainly have. And, you know, I am one of those who say that is a serious misallocation of what we call scarce resources, that we don't have infinite financial resources. I think it's an absolute outrage. I think it's dreadful economics that we bailed out failed businesses. And I just find it fascinating that socialists forget that it was the Labour Party that did it.
Dave? I mean, it sounds as if you're almost saying that those who are running for their lives from these countries in some cases, they're not all, but a significant number of them are, should they really suffer because we don't know what to do with our wealth?
But we've got people suffering here, so nobody gives us any money. Who's giving us money? We're billions and billions in debt. So we're
trillions,
not,
actually.
Trillions. So we're not a rich country. We might seem a rich country on paper. We've got people going to food banks to feed their kids, and we don't even look after them. Instead of sending all the money abroad, help the people over here first. We've paid the taxes.
We're only sending, 0.7% of... Anyway, go on.
Yeah, it's about £11 billion, I think, goes to Europe, and I think a similar amount goes to international development. It's relatively tiny numbers. I mean, Simon and I, we hear the passion in your voice, that we seem to be benefiting the wrong people in society. Well, that's why we have an election every few years, and the people can vote and make a change. As it happens, the people didn't make a big change at all, did they?
But nothing changes. There's nobody out there that are changed. The only people that would have made a change, in my opinion, were UKIP. But there's not enough people out there wanting to support them.
All right, Dave, thank you so much for the call.
Thank you.
Interesting. You raised some interesting points there. Tony in Chertsey says, would you ask your guest what his definition of the economy is? Thanks, says Tony. If you can keep it to a minute.
Yes, I would say it's household consumption, it's business investment, it's government spending, and its imports and exports. Put that all together, that is actually the definition of the economy.
All right, simple question. I wouldn't have been able to answer it myself, but well done. Let's go to Ali in Shepperton. Evening to you, Ali.
Good evening.
Welcome, and you're also through to our guest tonight, Jonathan Davis.
Good evening, Jonathan.
Good evening.
You want to talk about the weather and this prediction that we've been given. The first El Nino cycle for 5 years is going to begin. We're going to have a number of years of hideously cold winters, snowstorms, freezing temperatures. We're asking whether you believe that prediction, and also what your memories are of the seasons in this country from years gone by.
Well, I find this weather forecast a little bit odd, with their crystal ball. How do they know? How do they actually know with any certainty? It amazes me.
Because they're experts, they're meteorologists.
I know,
it's a bit like those who predict the economy.
Bizarre.
They know exactly to the letter in ink, indelible ink, what's going to happen.
3 weeks next Thursday, 11 o'clock, it's going to snow. It just amazes me, really. But I remember in 1981, I had my first child at the end of March, and we lived in Wiltshire.
Oh, God.
And she was 6 weeks old, so that puts it in the middle of May. And she was in her little cot by the window in a bungalow. And I woke up in the night and I thought, it's really cold. And the heating had gone off. There was no electric. And I looked out the window and there was snow up to the windowsill. And she'd gone blue. I was really, really worried about her. She was right next to the snow without double glazing in those days, 30-odd years ago.
Yes.
And I had to sort of put her next to my skin, and she obviously survived. But yeah, that was the middle of May, and there was snow up to the windowsill.
We forget, don't we, how cold houses used to be. I mean, we had central heating, but it wasn't great. And as you rightly remind us, the windows were not particularly successful either.
No, and the electric had gone off because the snow had brought the power cables down, and that was it. It was hideous, and that was in the middle of May. So, I can believe it. I actually can believe it.
I sense in your voice, however, that you don't necessarily put much faith in the prediction of weather.
No. Because I don't understand how it's done, because I don't get it, I suppose. I
mean, I had this argument with Mel earlier. Some of it is patterns, weather people. Absolutely right. But I said to Mel, and he's convinced that I'm wrong, and I said, well, let's try it for a week. If you look at any 5-day weather forecast, and you look at day one, it may be right, it may not. Even that can be sometimes. It says it's sunny, and you go out and it's raining, and it's happened even within the last month when that has been. And you think, well, if that's wrong, what on earth is 5? And then you think, right, I'm going to write down what it says today. It's going to be like on Saturday. In my experience, and I do this a lot because I plan for the weekend, 9 times out of 10, it is wrong. Often it is the opposite of what they're predicting. What about your experience?
Well, I want to know why there's only been 3 white Christmases in the last 2 centuries, because it has to be on that street, in that temperature, on that, I don't quite understand how they measure it. But also, can I ask a question on the economy?
Of course you may. Jonathan is suddenly sitting up in his seat.
Yes.
A furrowed brow with little light droplets of sweat, with fear of what you're going to... Go on.
No, if we're all in debt, all the countries are in debt to 50 million trillions, even going back to the First World War, we're still paying off that debt. Who are we in debt to? If we're all investing in these world banks, who are we borrowing from? And if the whole world is in debt, who are we in debt to? And who's got this money that is lending, if it's not us investing in the banks to lend to other countries? I don't quite understand the whole thing, really.
It's an excellent question, and one which, of course, the politicians were very clever not really to discuss up until the election. They don't want the reality of our situation to be known by the people. So I'm absolutely delighted that you've raised it. The United Kingdom owes £1,500,000 million, £1.5 trillion. That's what the government owes. And then you add on household debt and business debt. We're actually talking, for a population of about 63 million, we're talking 10 trillion, 10,000 billion pounds of debt. It's so astronomical, people can't relate to it. Who do we owe it to? in a nutshell, those who are lending it to us are banks, pension funds, private investors, other governments even, and ultimately, who holds the debt? Well, households hold the debt. The amount of mortgages is beyond belief. The government debt, which is held, is, as I say, vast, astronomical numbers. And who's going to have to pay it back? That's the question that is not being addressed. Ultimately, and this makes me very fearful for not 5 years in the future, not 15, but 25 or 35 years in the future, when my children grow up. They are the ones who are going to have to pay this debt. And how are they going to be paying for it? They're going to be paying for it by basically, and I do not say this with a smile on my face, you can essentially say goodbye to the welfare state. Because even now, in 2015, our illustrious government will spend about £50 billion a year just on interest on the debt. Not paying back the debt, just on interest. What does that mean? That is equivalent to building 100 full NHS trust hospitals every single year, just on interest. And because we're borrowing every single year, I mean, the government says that they want to get borrowing down to zero within 5 years. Well, it's a funny thing. They said that in 2010, and it didn't happen by a long shot. In fact, the last lot, which was the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats, they actually borrowed more than Gordon Brown. Think about that.
Ali, how does that make you feel?
Well, it's great numbers, but I still don't understand where the money came from to lend it
Can we
in the first place if we're still paying back.
Yes,
I really don't get it.
Given that there's an awful lot of, probably a majority of the world is in debt, would I be either is in debt or is in absolute abject poverty? Could we not necessarily in some way sit down and say, right, let's try if we can and unpick this and reset it like grown adults and try and work on it. But there must be, Ali, I'm assuming, there's a reason that we can't do that.
There are some economists who say that the solution is to score out the debt. Just cross it out. Pretend that it's not happened. To which I will say, there is no solution without enormous pain. And in that scenario, I can tell you the banks and our pensions would go down the pan. So ultimately, we the people would have enormous pain when the politicians who borrowed all this money over the last 3 or 4 decades in particular, they would be laughing.
But I think what Ali is trying to point out is, sorry, not point out because you know, but it's to us, it's numbers that have been created out of nowhere on a computer screen. Same thing has happened across the countries that do business with each other. So therefore, the pensions may suffer, but just create something that enables us all to...
How can the pensions suffer though? Because if we're spending billions, trillions, whatever, those gazillions on interest only, if we're not paying that, we could pay the pensions. If they ruled out all the debt for all the countries, they're singling out Greece unfairly, I think, of anybody. If they wipe the whole lot out, then all that interest could pay the pensions that we're worried about. Wouldn't it?
If our government debt of £1.5 trillion was suddenly just crossed off as if it hadn't happened, then certainly it would save our government from $50 billion a year. Well, it's a funny thing, but they're actually overspending by nearly $100 billion every single year. It's malinvestment. They've been bailing out these banks every single day for the last several years. It's malinvestment. That they're paying interest. They're not paying down the debt. They're leaving the next generation with enormous economic and societal problems. And they need to slash borrowings. They need to reduce the debt as soon as they can start doing so, to help our kids, give them a chance. At the moment, I tell you, 40% of the UK population has no chance for financial improvement, and the next generation is toast unless something changes.
Jonathan, thank you for that. Ali, go and have a gin and tonic.
Thank you.
Is what I suggest. Thank you for the call. Jane's in... Yeah, hang on. All right. I'm getting advice. Jane's in Peckham. Evening to you, Jane.
Oh, good evening.
Welcome.
That was very interesting listening to that, because I started to get interested in the economy when the debt started getting near $1 trillion. And I'm thinking...
Well, you got interested too late. You should have been there when it got to a mere 100,000. We could have stopped it.
Well, yes. So it is where it is. And that's how I... become, well, lots of other things like, that's how I become interested in politics and thought I've got to do something. Well, actually, I have got ideas that can clear this debt.
Go on, give us some ideas.
Right, you're not going to like it. Right. Number one, we've got to get rid of this mayoral charade, right?
As
we
in
haven't
what,
got
the
it.
Mayor of London, or...?
Boris Johnson and Ken Livingstone's lot. We've got the London mayor, haven't we? Which
Yes.
we've had, but the London mayor funds themselves, right?
But these are drops. We're talking about the British economy. How will you fix that?
Yeah. So anyway, that's it. We've got to take away the luxury. That's what we've got to take away.
What luxury?
You can't, as I said, number one, the mayoral charade.
Yeah, but these how much will the mayor say? What's the mayor on? 100,000?
No, the whole charade is not there. Like Mrs. Thatcher took it away, right? So number two, we can't do HS2. We haven't got the money for that.
This is pennies, isn't it?
Well, HS2 could be £20 billion, £50 billion. That's a lot of money.
Okay.
It's a vanity project. It's going to help the civil servants. It's not going to help the UK economy.
All right,
No, that's got it. No, if you're clearing a debt...
No, he's agreeing with you, so carry on. Okay,
then,
so HS2, yeah.
And then this EU Brussels waste of money club, right, we're not talking about coming out of Europe. No, we're never coming out of Europe. We're all friends, right? We might have the odd argument. My boss is Italian and I work with everybody from all around the world. But when I go to Brussels, Eurolines, that's it. Even in
So too much money. How much would that save us, Jonathan?
$10 billion.
Brussels, the club, right? That we pay £55 million a day.
And hang on one second.
To save Europe, the whole club shouldn't be there.
Would we get more money back by being out, or will we get more money by being part of this? Again, you say don't necessarily stop trading with Europe, but the organisation that is the fire, the furnace, if you like, that's got to go.
That's got to go for everyone in Europe.
Okay, let him answer.
I'm in the camp which is supportive of the little guy. The EU is a huge statist organisation. It's there to help people.
It doesn't help anyone. All it does is help itself.
Well, hang on, let him answer
somebody
why.
in Italy wants
Jay.
to sell me a car,
yes.
right, then... That's it. You just deal with the factory.
All right, let me try and learn something then for a second. So I mean, Jane makes a point. If you want to buy some from somebody in France or sell to somebody in France, you just do it. Why do you need Europe?
I couldn't agree more. You don't. We all love French wine. We all love to go on the ferries over to France and Italy and Spain and have our 2-week holiday there. But what the little guy is, I'm talking about the self-employed in the UK. I'm talking about the small and medium-sized enterprises, perhaps under 50 staff. We are massively regulated, ultimately by laws which come from unelected commissioners in Brussels in the European Union, which hands these diktats down to all the governments, and the governments just have to put them into force.
Why is
they
it
have
so
no
many
option.
businesses are fearful of coming out of the European Union?
Well, see, that's the thing. If you talk to the Institute of Directors, you talk to the Confederation of British Industry, the CBI, they will say, oh, we've got to stay in the EU. Because these guys represent multinationals and large national companies. They don't represent the little guy, the small businesses, the small entrepreneurs. There are millions of us in the UK, and we are massively over-regulated. I'll give you an example. If you're one of the big banks, you might spend, I don't know, £100 million complying with all the regulations. I tell you, Simon, that is a drop in the ocean of their finances. But if you're a little building society or say a local financial advisor, okay, you're not spending millions of pounds, of course, on complying with the rules, but you're spending a very large proportion of your revenues, of your income, a very large proportion of your time and energy just complying with rules. That's why the big companies, that's why the multinationals love regulations, love the EU, because it helps them to avoid competition.
Hold that thought. Jane, it sounds like he's absolutely in agreement with you. 15 seconds, just finish off before we get to the headlines. Jane, last point, 15 seconds.
What we've got to do is to make people healthy and happy.
Well, no one's going to disagree with that. Thank you very much indeed, Jane. 0207 224 2000 is our number. 11:30. Simon Lederman Show, BBC London 94.9. Jonathan Davis is our guest this hour, and Valley Fontaine has the headlines.
Thanks, Simon. A man's been found hanging near a reservoir in northeast London after the bodies of his twin daughters and their mother were found in a house in Chadwell Heath. A 17-year-old boy who allegedly planned to travel to Syria to fight before changing his mind has been spared prosecution. The teenager was said to have been intent on travelling to take part in jihad before having a change of heart and deciding to come home before he reached the country. A series of letters between Prince Charles and government ministers has finally been published. The letters, written between 2004 and 2005, covered topics including the armed forces, farming and badger culling. They were released under the Freedom of Information Act following a legal battle by the Guardian newspaper. Diane Abbott has formally entered the race to become Labour's candidate for London Mayor. David Lammy, Tessa Jowell and Sadiq Khan have already put their names in the frame. The European Commission has criticised the UK and other countries for refusing to take in refugees from the current migrant crisis in the Mediterranean. The Commission proposed that EU countries take in 20,000 people over the next 2 years. And London's weather, another chilly night with a low of 5 degrees Celsius, that's 41 degrees Fahrenheit. Tomorrow, outbreaks of rain developing, cold with a brisk easterly breeze and a high of 11 degrees Celsius, that's 52 degrees Fahrenheit. That's the headlines. There'll be a full update at midnight.
James Max on BBC London 94.9.
Do I pause too much or not enough?
Weekday mornings from 2.
I think sometimes you're a bit speedy, but sometimes I think you're like, oh, for God's sake, I've got to do this, let's get it over and done with.
The views, the debate.
Exactly that.
Okay.
Same as voting generally is like...
The people have spoken.
The arguments.
You can argue till you're blue in the face, James, but it doesn't make any difference.
It's not a question of arguing, it's a question of understanding what your mindset is.
For early morning London.
I'm so sorry about the fact that we've got a cat story, because everybody loves cats.
James Max.
I have never seen cats, and I can't stand cats.
Weekday mornings from 2.
Everybody loves cats.
No, they don't.
Call 020 722 42000.
Text 81333. Start your message with the word London.
BBC London 94.9.
Simon Lederman Show, BBC London 94.9. Jonathan Davis is our guest in the studio. We're taking calls on everything, but obviously Jonathan's expertise is economics, but we're talking about the other subjects as well, including extremism. Adam is in Stratford. Evening to you, Adam.
Hi, hello.
Welcome.
Thank
what
you.
do you make of what we heard earlier on, this idea that in this country we're too tolerant and should interfere more in people's lives, according to David Cameron?
I think we're going to get ourselves into a really, really sticky situation where what we're trying to do is trying to police what people are thinking.
Yes.
Which is just impossible.
It's 1984 stuff, isn't it? It's George Orwell.
It's you can't even think this stuff. I mean, Cameron was talking about going against the rule of law, democracy, and if you say anything against that, you're an extremist. I mean, so if you're a monarchist, if you believe that we should be ruled by a monarchy, and you sort of organise conferences or send out leaflets or try to have demonstrations trying to convince people that we should all be ruled by a monarchy, are we going to put that person in jail?
It's an interesting question, because what he's talking about is people holding, and it chimes into what you're saying, minority extremist views that differed from Britain's consensus. And the argument is, what is Britain's consensus? Because you could argue we really don't have a single voice with which we speak anymore. And secondly, interestingly about what you say, are extremist views that are dangerous, or are extremist views those that are just on the periphery of normal views? I mean,
if people have different, if someone thinks that we should be ruled by a monarchy, let them think that. Let them try to convince other people. I don't think they're going to get very far.
No. But would you say that the safe dividing line is to say, if you're on the street saying to people, I believe there should be a monarchy, I want us to be ruled by a monarchy, and I want you to carry out violent acts to ensure we do, then you can be clear that...
We have legislation.
We do,
already,
exactly.
Yeah, that takes care of incitement to violence.
But what about the nuanced area between what you were saying, people with the view that they want to be ruled by a monarchy? And I think it's an interesting quite a safe area to debate, and the line of violence. Because what he's saying is, there are very clever people who can obey the law, but will still be behaving in such a way that an absolute vast majority of people in this country would find unpalatable.
Yeah, but
and it's that little gap that's the problem.
Just because people have views which are unpalatable by the majority, I mean, that's what makes us a tolerant society, isn't it? I mean, that's what we like about our society, isn't it?
Is it? Because also I remember though when we were seeing some pretty extreme views that were from all kinds of people over the lifetime that I've been here, be it about Ireland, be it about the Middle East, be it about Islam or whatever it may be. Even the people who agree that we're a wonderfully tolerant country would say there has to be responsibility when it comes to tolerance, and there must be responsibility when it comes to free speech, because otherwise the system collapses. Do you agree with that, or do you think that anything should be said?
I think so. There is no absolute free speech. I agree with that. There are sort of boundaries where you have to be respectful of other people's deeply held views and try not to sort of go behind. But those boundaries are difficult to define.
And that's the problem, isn't it? So when people are able to get around the law because we can't define their area of behaviour, do you see that is the reason that he has some validity?
I go back to my example of the monarchist. So does anybody have a problem, really, with someone just going about in the street trying to convince everybody that we need to be ruled by a monarchy? Is that person an extremist? Are we going to sort of bring them up on charges and put them in jail because they're trying to convince just generally the public that we should be ruled by a monarchy?
So do you agree with one of our last callers who suggested that actually what this is about, it may well be dished up or disguised in any way you may wish, but actually what this is about Islam and is about nothing else?
I mean, I've got a lot of Muslim friends and friends from other faiths as well, and the Muslim friends, I can say fairly majority of them are sort of that kind of thinking, that this is a way to target Islam, but through sort of liberal talk, by trying to pass legislation which seems to be targeting everybody, but actually it's only going to be enforced on sort of people from the Muslim background. So.
And are you confident that the laws we have that deal with extremism, both views that may well incite other people to act, but also direct behaviour, are you confident that the laws we currently have are reasonably successful enough to ensure that we remain safe as a country?
I think the laws that we already have against incitement to hatred, incitement to violence, are already enough.
All right. Thank you very much, Steve, for that, Adam. 0207 224 2000. Let's go to Tony, who's in Chertsey, who has a question for you, Jonathan. Evening to you, Tony.
Hi, Simon.
Welcome. Right.
Thanks very much.
All over to you.
Okay. Jonathan, thanks very much for answering my question about a definition for the economy.
Oh, that was your start of a 10. We now get to the nitty-gritty. Right, okay.
Yeah, the nitty-gritty is, if I said to you, Jonathan, money is just a subjective concept, how would you respond?
I think what you're alluding to, Tony, is that whenever I ask the question of people, where does money come from, very, very few people get the right answer. And of course, the answer is it literally comes from thin air, because bankers push a few computers' buttons and they create money. So the amount of money there is in the system has literally just been effectively imagined. So that's my response to your question.
Oh, right, yeah, okay. Because what I was also going to ask you was, how important...
Oh, hang on, you have to move back to wherever you were, Tony, because your phone's breaking up.
Okay, is that better, Simon?
Yeah, go on, yep.
What I was going to say, Jonathan, what importance does the money supply have to the economy?
Yeah, what you're referring to is the more money that is created by banks or the Bank of England, and people should realise the Bank of England only creates a tiny amount of money. It's the big banks, the building societies, the lending institutions that create over 95% of all money. They push a button and they're all of it. You go into the bank.
Well, sorry, I'm so sorry. Go on. I'm in shock.
Well, exactly. It's that
the
crazy.
The banks do it.
Yes, indeed they do. They create over 95% of all the money.
So who does it? The manager of the St John's Wood branch, the person who is in the head office in Scotland, or somebody in China and the Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank?
It is the board of directors who ultimately say this year we're going to create, I don't know, £100 billion. So that goes down to the various regions, and each region has got to create, say, £3 billion that year, or whatever the number is.
So.
Beg your pardon?
Without government say so.
Exactly. The banks have carte blanche to create whatever loans they want to create. And my bugbear is they were doing that up until 2008. They were lending recklessly. And why? Because they knew that when it all hit the fan, they'd be bailed out. And they were.
Tony?
It does seem as though money is just a form of control.
Ah, well, there we are. That's a debate. That's a debate and a half, isn't it?
I think that's worth a 3-day conference, really.
We'll have a 3-day conference of that. Tony, does this fill you with dread, or do you believe firmly in your heart of hearts that any problems we have financially will be solved? We just don't know how yet. Or do you feel that there will be generations after us, that will suffer for a long, long time?
Was that a question to me, Simon?
Yes, it was.
Yeah, right. Well, I think that the time has come for money to cease to exist. I think that because of...
For me, money has ceased to exist. But anyway, go on. It doesn't do me much.
Me too, really.
Yeah.
Go to the car boot sales. Don't buy at retail. Yeah, I mean, because we are effectively, I think, living in such a rich society, and even more so because machines are producing the wealth rather than us anymore. Why do we need the money side of it to ensure what I was talking about earlier, this form of control?
Well, indeed, I'm actually with you on that. It's a very, very big issue that you're raising. I would bring it down to this. If the banks were not allowed to get away with proverbial murder and lend recklessly to borrowers who are borrowing recklessly, then, for example, I tell you, house prices would be lower. And if house prices were lower, then accommodation costs would be lower, rents would be lower, commercial property rents would be lower, business costs would be lower, they could employ more people, people's standard of living would rise, and so on. There is an issue with lending. If we banned bank bailouts, I tell you, the banks wouldn't be lending as much, and we would have a higher standard of living. But that's such a big issue, can't really be handled at 11:45 on a Wednesday night.
Tony, thank you for the call. Can I ask you one question then? Just lastly on this aspect of banks being able to print money. I thought it was only the Bank of England. If you have a global banking world as we have now, banks that are not owned by necessarily exclusively within this country, a bank could bring this country, well, arguably they have done, but there is no control of the government of the country of how much sterling is created.
There is no
other
control.
Than the tiny bit you were saying the government do.
The Bank of England, that's right. It's calculated at roughly 3% of money which is created by the Bank of England. There is no control, and I'm not saying there should be control. What I'm saying is the banks themselves should self-regulate. If they knew for sure that the next time they have massive losses, that they're not going to be bailed out, then I tell you, their lending practices would change markedly. Unfortunately, they seem to rule the show.
All right, thank you for that. Let's go to Fenella in Whetstone. Evening to you, Fenella. We were talking about whether you feel the NHS sometimes offer tests or drugs that you don't really need.
Good evening, Simon.
Welcome.
Firstly, can I just say that I've really enjoyed listening to Jonathan.
Well, he's a font of all knowledge, and actually, I'm still in some sense of shock from what he's just told us earlier on.
I know, I was as well.
Did you know that a bank that isn't the Bank of England could create money?
No.
No, I didn't.
I didn't either.
Right.
So, Jonathan, thank you for a very, very interesting hour. Simon, yes. Well, two things. A few weeks ago we were having a discussion about me eating crisps. Well, one of the reasons I raised the issue up was because I've got high cholesterol. I never used to have high cholesterol, but then I had some bloods done and it came back as not massively high, but it's higher than what it should be. And at the hospital, the consultant who I'm under, she told me I needed really to go on statins because, it was high enough to need them. And I said, well, at the moment, I don't really want them because I'm on other medication. But she was really trying to push them. And I decided that I'm going to try other things first.
Did you tell her that?
Yes, I did.
What was her reaction when you said, actually, give me...
She didn't want to hear. She said to me, you will need them. I'm happy for you to try those yogurts and spreads and things, but if in 3 months it hasn't dropped a little bit, then, you will need to consider the medication. It's not dangerously high, so it's not like I'm in a dangerous situation or anything like that.
So when you decided not to accept that treatment, what happened to your health?
Well, nothing's happened, except she wrote in a letter to my GP that I've refused statins. And I went to see my GP about something else, and I said to my GP, by the way, I got a copy of the letter, and I just wanted to tell you that I didn't refuse. What I said was, at this particular time, I've chosen not to have them. And my GP said, well, I think you're on quite a lot of medication, and, I'm quite happy for you not to be prescribed something else.
Yes.
But she said we do have to keep an eye on it.
So do you sense that there is something that is encouraging them to give perhaps drugs and tests that are not needed, that are not necessary, that it's over-diagnosis?
I think in my case I do need them, and at some point I may end up having to have them. But
you're resisting so far.
Sorry?
You're resistant so far to the idea.
Yeah, I'm making lifestyle changes. But what I wanted to say was I have seen people who don't need particular medications being given them, and if I say to them like, what did your test come back as with this, and they say, oh well, nothing, but they want me to try this because, you know, reason X. And I think that you do have to be careful, because all medication has side effects, and unless you have a specific condition that needs treating, I don't think I just think you have to be careful.
All right. Thank you very much, Lee, for that. It's interesting, and we'll follow what's going on with you with interest in the next few weeks. Thank you for the call. Quick email. Jonathan says we are in debt up to our eyeballs, and our kids will have to pay for it, and there is no easy way out. You said that, didn't you? But he also,
that doesn't mean there isn't a way out.
Okay. He also says we can afford to take on the migrants. Confused.
Well, as I say, for example, they're going to spend, we don't know how much, but it's estimated it could be £50 billion on a rail line which will save 20 minutes to go from London to Birmingham. I mean, for goodness sake, to me, it's a nonsense.
All right, thank you for that. Tony's in Enfield. Evening to you, Tony.
Good evening, and good evening, Jonathan.
Good evening.
And can I say welcome back? I'm assuming you're back in the country then?
Yes, I am, yes.
Welcome back.
Good.
Anyway, go on.
Anyway, yes, the economy and the collapse of the economy, I think the answer is quite simple. It's the capitalist system, and one day it will completely collapse. We are where we are because of, capitalism to me.
But isn't the problem we haven't got true capitalism?
Well, it means exploitation. The wealth of the planet is created by the workforce. Everybody that goes to work creates, whether somebody presses a button in the Royal Bank of Scotland and, they earn another £10 million profit for the month or whatever it is. The wealth is created by the workforce. So why on earth are we talking about people living in cardboard boxes and people fleeing parts of their country because they fear death and torture and all the rest of it? We would all do that, and I think they should be supported. I think all the people that take off in such a dramatic way to leave their home and culture, family and neighbour and all the rest of it, of course we should open arms for these people.
Jonathan, it's a capitalist system.
Yeah, well, it's total nonsense. We don't have a capitalist system at all, Tony. That's absolute rubbish. It's crony capitalism. It's fascism. It's whatever ism you want to put to it, but it's not capitalism. Because in capitalism, if a business fails, it's not bailed out. We had cash for clunkers in 2008, so you could get £3,000 for buying a new car. It's just misallocation of scarce resources handed to those that politicians believe should have the money. This is not capitalism. What we have is anything but capitalism. And trust me, Tony, unfortunately it's 8 minutes to midnight, so we can't discuss it much. But if we had capitalism, then we would have a fairer society. The only time that I know of that capitalism was actually allowed to run its course was in 1920 to 21 in the United States, where they had a huge depression, but capitalism ran its course. Then they had the Roaring Twenties. I'll leave it at that.
Well, I don't know. I disagree with you. Of course, it's a capitalist system. That's why we have the wealth in the city. I mean, the city of London, the crime
scene.
No doubt about that. We've got people living in cardboard boxes. We've got food banks. It's all under a free market capitalist system.
It's not free market.
Well, the wealth that's created by the workforce, the distribution of that goes to the minority of people. Jonathan, that's capitalism. It's not for social good. It's not for even wealth of the people. That creates the wealth is even from John O'Groats to Land's End. It's down to the minority of people. It's banks, corporates, oil companies, call it whatever you like. That's a capitalist system.
Tony, let me tell you of four great socialist paradises in the 20th and 21st century. One was the Soviet Union. Another one was China under the Cultural Revolution. And third was Adolf Hitler, National Socialism. And the fourth one, which is happening right now, is Venezuela, where they have queues 500 long to buy toilet rolls. Don't give me socialism. Believe me, it's never worked in history.
Tony, we'll come back to that another night. I'm really sorry. I know you want to come back, but we're going to run out of time if we don't move on. But Tony, can I thank you for the call, as always? Tony, say goodbye. He's gone. Right. What? Hang on. Stop it. Stop. Look. Just stop. Look. I did. So stop it. Right. I want to talk, if we can, about Scottish independence, financial independence, which, depending on the comments that you understand or you read, two things happen. One, they're saying, good luck to them, good riddance, let them drop the economy if it goes wrong. Others saying, actually, it's only fair because of the impact of the voting results on Thursday last week.
Well, the last part of your question is a political debate, which I really wouldn't want to get into at this point. Economically, if Scotland were to have another independence vote and they voted for independence, or if, as is being suggested to David Cameron, that Scotland is given what they call full fiscal independence. In other words, they can raise whatever taxes they want, they can do whatever spending they want. I think in the short term, Scotland will have problems. But eventually, whether it's 5 or 10 or 15 years, I'm not sure, Scotland has a phenomenal opportunity to be one of the strongest economies on the planet. Why? Well, let's think. It has a highly educated population. It speaks English. They are hugely ingenious. Think of all the inventions, including the television that came out of Scotland. And just think, if Scotland was an offshore centre of England, just think how many businesses would want to offshore into Scotland from England. I think Scotland would do fantastically well on its own.
And now we know that the banks can just print money if it goes wrong, and they'll continue it. Catherine says, can you ask Jonathan how much HS2 he thinks is going to cost? When talking to Jane, he said 20 billion. Just now he said 50 billion. By the way, she doesn't agree with it, says Catherine. I don't agree with it, says Catherine, anyway.
The Treasury has various estimates. It's 20 to 60 billion. It's an enormous amount of money for what, to my mind, frankly, is a vanity project.
Hughes says, Simon, Boris boasts we have more millionaires than New York. It seems London's wealth is biased towards the upper 10%. We are wealthy. John Major said our food banks are shameful for the 5th richest country in the world. It's a case of statistics, damn statistics and lies, says Hugh.
Yeah, well, of course, it's not the top 10%. It's the top either 1% or maybe even the top 0.1%. Yes, there are lots of 100 millionaires and billionaires in London, but that doesn't make our society economically prosperous.
Can I thank you so much for being here this hour? Just a couple of things I want to do to close if we can. One is, if people want to find out more about you and about what you do, then how can they do it?
They could go onto our website, which is Jonathan Davis, WM, as in wealthmanager.com. There's some very interesting articles on there which might help them in their own planning.
And secondly, there's a huge amount of fear from everybody, as you can hear, about what is going to happen and what may happen to their own lives. And on a minutiae level, it really is about you and your family. Is there any blue sky, sunshine on the horizon?
Well, yes. It depends on your situation. I would suggest to you that anyone who's close to government will always do well. The civil service always seems to do well. Anyone in multinationals should do well. Anyone in banking is likely to do well. If the global economy has another economic shock, which it did in 2008 and it had in 2000 to 2002, then yes, I think half the population in the UK are going to be detrimentally affected. With regards to, I give an investment idea, if I may, for people's pensions. This is going to make some people smile. One of our best ideas right now is to invest in the Greek stock market.
Because can't go much lower.
It's gone down 90 to 95% over the last 15 years. It's absolutely hated. Baron Rothschild said in the 19th century, buy when there's blood in the streets. In that economy, the stock market, there's blood in the streets. I tell you, on a medium-term view, I think it's a phenomenal opportunity.
It is a cruel world. Thank you so much, Jonathan, for joining us live on the programme tonight. Economist and wealth manager Jonathan Davis. 1 minute to midnight. We'll get reaction on 0207 224 2000 and more on extremism, more on GPs and more on the weather too. Right, 1 minute to midnight and Valley Fontaine has the headlines on the way next.
BBC London 94.9, the latest travel news. Better news for the A12 now. East Cross route heading eastbound. All lanes have reopened there on the A12 at the junction with Hackney Wick. Still problems also if you're heading around Mitcham on the A217 London Road southbound. Remember, there's no right turn tonight. That's because of emergency repair works to a burst water main taking place at the junction with Riley Gardens. Again, there's a number of bus routes that are on diversion as a result of that. Other problems I told you about earlier on in Tufnell Park, on Dartmouth Park Hill in both directions, they're no longer affecting traffic. The building fire that